Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Hello, and thank you for being here. As always, very few books can keep my attention nowadays. It's just being a single parent, being a coach, being somebody who is quite busy most of the time. I have a hard time reading a book. I've been driven to more podcasts, more audiobooks, but this Kerry Kerr McAvoy's book, Love You More, kept me captivated. I did listen to it. She reads it and I couldn't stop listening to it. I was going for long walks instead of doing my workouts just so I could listen to this book. I really enjoyed listening to Kerry's story despite it being so difficult because I felt like she put words and emotions and feelings to something that a lot of us are going through, but we don't quite understand how to conceptualize it. And the book shows her healing journey, shows how she works through an abusive relationship, and it also shows how confusing it was in the beginning when somebody's basically telling you everything that you want to hear, showing you a certain side of love that you haven't had, and that's not who they actually are. Kerry Kerr McAvoy has been on this podcast before. She's a psychologist, she's a writer, and she is an expert on cultivating healthy relationships. She is an amazing resource for deconstructing narcissism and understanding various other mental health related issues. In this podcast, we are going to dive deep into her book, Love You More, which is a tale of how she took many twists and turns in getting out and understanding a relationship with a narcissistic sociopath. The book covers lies, sex addiction, and double cross. And this podcast really allows Kerry and I to tap into her journey of healing. Because I exist in this space of narcissistic abuse and because Kerry also exists in the space, we speak in the same language, and we are able to uncover a lot of the things that happened in her relationship that were very difficult to understand and to see her steps along the way. I highly recommend listening to this, and I obviously recommend her book, Love You More. There's a link in the show notes. You can easily access it. And I really hope that this episode helps you feel like you're not alone. Hi, Kerry. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Jessica. It means a lot.
Just for anybody who's new to this episode, can you share a bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist. I was trained in a traditional graduate program in a PhD in psychology, got out, began to practice, moved into private practice, worked for over 20 years, had a successful practice, was married with 3 sons. And then in 2015, my husband passed away rather rapidly from a very aggressive cancer. And my life kind of just blew apart. And I closed my practice because his care needed me to focus on him. And when he passed away, suddenly I was sort of lost. My practice had been closed now for 6 months. It was really going to be difficult to return. I didn't really was ready to return. I wasn't in shape to see clients. So I was in this really lost place. And in that space, I met probably somebody, I married him, so it's really can't technically diagnose him, but I would guess he's a narcissistic sociopath. I had known about abuse. I even worked with a lot of abuse victims myself over the years. I've had some special training in graduate program on domestic violence, but I hadn't really known what happens in a relationship with a narcissist. So I end up in this relationship for 2 years. It's a disaster. Rampant cheating, gaslighting. I'm feeling so burdened, so affected that my functioning is deteriorating. And it just is worsening and worsening. And I just felt trapped. And then what shocked me was my own deterioration. I couldn't make up my mind. And I'm a person who makes up my mind really quickly. I mean, I had been a landlord. I was buying and selling real estate before I met him. I could walk into a property and within 10 minutes knew if I wanted to make an investment in that property or not. And here I am in this relationship, and I can't even make many basic decisions, but I certainly can't decide whether to stay or go. The whole thing kind of collapsed after 2 years of marriage. I had an opening. I kind of pushed for what we now call reverse discard. I wanted him to discard me because he terrified me. And when I got out of it, I was confused. I mean, I thought my education should have told me what was happening to me, and it should have made sense of it for me, but it didn't. So I began to write the story as a way for me to heal, because I love to write. So I wrote the book, Love You More. And in that 3 years that I spent writing and editing that book, I made this big discovery, and social media played a huge role in it, that I had been a survivor of narcissistic abuse. So that kind of led me to where I am, to really start to hone in on that. I've now done a lot of continuing education hours in this topic, been talking to experts around the country on this topic, and connecting with, of course, thousands of people who've struggled with this, but also people who are trying to be thought leaders in understanding what happened, not only to me, but what's happening to millions of people who get trapped in these types of relationships.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear that when you were writing your book is when you started to put together the pieces of this is narcissism, or like that it's not just like this happened to me and I don't know what it is and he's just toxic, but that there's this bigger personality disorder at play in this whole dynamic.
I'd have to say, actually, the writing of the book helped me to see what really happened, because one of the things anybody who's experienced narcissistic abuse quickly discovers is they no longer know what's real and not real. They no longer have a sense of reality. So writing the book helped me discover reality. I suddenly had this massive ahas that were earth-shaking, because many of them were very painful discoveries. As I teased and combed through the inconsistencies, the odd way which things would be said to me, what really things meant, the way things lined up with behavior versus what was said, all of that. That's what I discovered was what was real by writing the book. But actually it was social media that helped. And I also, at the same time, I have to back up. There's 3 things that were impacting me. One is I immediately jumped into a group of survivors of sexual addiction. So this was a community of women with a relational coach who was also certified a sex therapist, ran this community of women. So we together I was in the group, which was a private group, exclusive premium group. It was 3 hours a week. So it was a paid group, 3 hours a week. So I jumped into that. I had found her in the middle of the relationship. I'd found them through an online, like a support group on like one of the, like Facebook. And I was hanging out in that. And I knew that she'd had this group for women who were in the process of leaving the group. So that helped. And simultaneously, I also came across Patrick Carnes' book called Betrayal Bonds, which we now call Trauma Bonds. So I had read that. And at the same time, I was launching my platform on social media to begin to advertise the book. And that's when I started to see other people in the field like Lisa Sunny, Stronger Than Before, Mental Healness, Lee Hammock. I started seeing these big profile brands that were talking about this. And then I had this massive aha. It's like, whoa, same language, same behaviors, same activities, same gaslighting. I felt like, where is the narcissistic playbook? Because there has to be one. These experiences are so universal. That was sort of how I kind of moved into this. And then once that started happening, because of my education and my previous experience and even experience working with narcissistic clients, everything started to fit in like puzzle pieces and started to make sense to me.
Yeah. And I think it's like when we first begin to go scroll those social media profiles and we start to see not only is that the exact wording that somebody has said to us, but it's also like the amount of people that have either liked or commented on that post and are like, me too, this is happening. It just, it opens up a whole world of, now that I understand what this is, it's like terrifying, but also it's hard to begin to put together all those pieces. Do you think that the support group that you were in helped with that? Or was that the first step?
Yeah, I think it was pivotal. I already had known one of the things that came out of the work that Bessel van der Kolk's work, he wrote the book, Body Keeps the Score. I got to hear him speak in Washington, D.C. and some continuing education. So I got to actually see the man, listen to his voice, hear him speak. By the way, he's really soft-spoken and he sounds just as warm and inviting as you would imagine someone who works in trauma. And one of the things he said was, I thought this was powerful. He says, in the United States, let's just take the United States, which is one of the safer countries in the world, actually. I mean, we have a lot of laws. When you go elsewhere, you feel a little less safe than you do here. But 80% of the population in the United States has a class, he said, like class A, the serious trauma. 80% of us survive a serious trauma in our life. He said only 40% don't recover. The other 60% move through it and go on with life and resume normal functioning. So what's different about the 40%? He said it's the community, it's the social support that they get makes the difference. Whether or not there's those around them that know how to rally around them to help them move through it. Now, you take that percentage, though, and this is what Sandra Brown found in her research, that 70% who go through narcissistic abuse end up with PTSD symptoms. 90% are traumatized, and 70% don't recover well.
Yeah.
Now, no one's actually saying, right now I'm hearing like, oh my goodness, there's a 30% difference between these two groups. What's the difference? I don't know, but I'm going to hazard a guess. I'm going to hazard a guess is because there's a lack of support. Let's go back to what Vanderkolk said. It's support. If you don't have support, then how do you make sense of what happened? How do you process this incredible emotional experience that's left you confused, questioning yourself, and not even sure what's real? You need a really helpful community that can make sense and translate your experience into something that you can now process and heal and then eventually make meaning out of it. And most of us don't have that. It's very hard to find that.
Yeah. It's helping me reflect back to when I started to put together a lot of these pieces. I mean, with my ex-husband, all I could do is I would see things about narcissism from, oh my God, I can't even think of the Instagram handle. There's an Instagram handle of somebody that her name is Maria, but she's not anywhere on the internet. But I started to be like, oh my God, what the lesson I'm learning from this is that it's not going to change. And if I know that it's not going to change, then I can't expect it to change. This is how this person is. And then I kind of stopped there. And then I got into this super emotionally abusive relationship and literally nothing made sense. The only thing that made sense for me was when I would spend time on Reddit typing in various things that were happening or go on Google and type emotional abuse and then a description of something that happened, I guess gaslighting without knowing it's gaslighting, telling me what my thoughts are, Reddit. And I would just start reading people's stories because I didn't know how to find community. I didn't know where to go. Wow. If you post on Reddit, it's very rare. I mean, every once in a while you get a response, but I wasn't getting any responses when I posted. So then I just started to read other people's stories and they were so similar to mine that I would just see myself in their story. And I would try and take the advice and the feedback that even if it was 4 years old, it was still relevant today. And there's thousands and thousands of people in these groups. And so that actually made me feel like I'm not alone. I might not know these people, but I'm not alone.
Right. Yeah. I'll take something that I'll think when I experienced it, oh, nobody has experienced this. This is an unusual thing. And then I'll make a video about it and I'll just say, hey, this happened. Narcissists do this. And I'm shocked. But then, mine too, mine too, mine too, mine too, mine too. This week, Tara and I on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse posted a podcast on sex and narcissism. What aren't narcissists great lovers? Sort of breaking the myth of that. We had a long letter of a woman recounting point by point how our experiences also mirrored her own. It is uncanny, the similarities that happen. Now, standing back as a psychologist, I actually can make sense of that because when you have a certain kind of profile and you view the world in a certain kind of way, you're going to have pretty stereotypical responses. So it's not surprising as a psychologist when you're yeah, okay, you're paranoid and you're jealous and you see things as competitively. Yeah, then you're going to respond like this, defensively. You're going to be protective. You're going to avoid any risk. You're going to do a lot. I mean, it's not, but when we're in those moments, we don't know that. We're just surviving a relationship, thinking that our relationship's unique to us, not realizing that what we're experiencing is common to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think it's so hard for people who have not been abused or have not been in a relationship with a narcissist to understand abuse and what it takes to heal and break out of it?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of factors, many factors that are impacting it. So let me kind of break down. This is just some of my guesses based on just spending time with people. One, I think, is our own experiences, our primary experience, and we have a hard time being empathic towards other people. So if it happens to us, it's the worst thing in the world. But if it happens to somebody else, we just feel hassled by them bringing it up. It makes us uncomfortable. So we have that problem right off the bat. It's just, how do we feel compassion when we feel tired and exhausted and we don't have a lot of bandwidth for that? And that we also are really coming from an egocentric perspective. I think that's what's happening in a lot of people's lives. And then you take in that, yeah, it happens more commonly than we think. It's just we've never identified it before. And I think people don't know how to show up for it. So they just would rather shut it down. It puts them in the uncomfortable spot of, what do you say to that? And I also think we don't like to feel at risk in the world. So the idea that there's danger makes us uncomfortable. We're willing to watch it on television or go to the movies, but we want it to stay there. We don't want to know that this kind of behavior actually occurs in the real world and maybe even somebody we know and love. So I think there's a level of denial that's just uncomfortable. I think the other thing is it makes us question our own healthiness and whether or not we're guilty of some of the same behaviors. And so sometimes we feel called out. So if we're feeling called out, we're going to be very defensive and we're going to go in attack mode. So I think there's like lots of reasons why we do this, but it's all ugly. Unfortunately, what it does is it's another form of abuse because then we've then minimized and invalidated that person's experience in order for us to take care of our own emotional well-being. That's never a good idea.
Yeah, I think Lindy Bancroft touches on that inside the minds of angry and controlling men towards the back of the book, the end of the book, when he talks about like, if you know somebody who's in an abusive relationship, just telling them to just leave, it's abusive. You're telling them to do something that they can't, like, if they could just leave, they would leave.
Exactly. This is one of the things I found as a therapist. People think that you go in and you see a therapist, you see a psychologist, and they're going to have answers. No, you've already thought of all the best answers. You've already done all that work. You're coming to me because you're out of answers. And I don't have any more magic than you do. I'm going to say the same things that you've already considered and have crossed off the list. So my job is to help you figure out why those are not options and maybe help you to see that there's what's going on that's making you afraid or unable to take those options. But I'm not going to have any better answers for you. But I feel like sometimes we think there's this magical list out there, this magical, so almost like toolbox of fantastic, useful utensils. And somebody's holding out on the answer from us, but that's not actually the case.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in my experience, also in being the patient, but also being the coach on the other side, I've seen a lot of therapists or psychologists that I guess we as people think that they should know and understand a lot of these dynamics. And a lot of them actually have no idea about the signs of narcissistic abuse or what to even look out for.
Right. I was just talking to somebody else today about what does a PhD mean? My dad used to say it meant piled higher and deeper.
Yeah.
Now, it's really not that. It's not, a piece of whatever. But what it did do for me is that it made me realize how little I know against the scope of what could be known. Psychology is a huge field, huge. So the average, let's just say that you meet someone with a PhD. Let's not even say that they have a master's, means they have 2 to 3 years less of classroom time than a PhD does. And they're also coming out with less practical experience than a PhD. So they're coming out with approximately 2 to 3 years less clinical experience and less classroom experience than a PhD level. But let's just take the PhD level, okay? The highest tier. And by the way, for those who are curious, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? A psychiatrist went to school to be a doctor. That occurred first, pre-med, then medical school, then residency. And then they spend their last few years learning about psychology. A psychologist goes to school for college for psychology, then goes to graduate school for another 4 to 5 years in psychology, and then has all this clinical experience in learning how to do therapy. So we've had like 8 to 10 years of clinical training. So let's just take that, which to me, I think you really want someone who knows the field a lot, it's going to be a PhD probably is the one that knows the most. I know psychiatrists were probably different. They're going to be really good with the medication piece, but psychologists are going to be really good with the therapy piece, the mind piece. So we come out, but the problem is the scope of psychology includes assessments, school psychology, developmental psychology, the neurology, perception and cognition, learning. I could go on and on and on, all the things we have to know something about. We don't have the space to take a long time to talk about what goes wrong inside of a relationship. That's a really specialized area. So the average clinician, they've focused in on how they're going to treat. Maybe it's cognitive behavioral. Maybe they're going to do insight-oriented work. Maybe they're going to do brief solution focus, but they're going to decide on a form of therapy. But they won't have had time to learn about personality disorders and then what happens inside a relationship. Most of them have not even heard of narcissistic abuse or relational harm or whatever word you want to put to it. This is a new term that's just come out in the last few years. And there's no course that I know of in the United States, at least that I'm aware of, that talks about this. Now, there's a couple certification programs that are in development right now. Dr. Ramani is working on one and Dr. Sandra Brown's working on one. But outside of that, you're seeing clinicians who barely know what betrayal trauma is. Mm-hmm. And they're now expected to be a specialist in this area. And so it's no wonder so many people they get good couples or marital help, but that's different than narcissistic abuse relationship help. Really different. And then they end up giving, unfortunately, bad advice or wrong information.
And as you talk through that, I'm thinking about like being inside of a couples therapy session with a narcissist.
Yeah. And I've done it. I've been there.
Yeah. Did they pick up, when you did that, did they pick up on it?
No, I fired 2 therapists. I fired 2 outright. One made me feel super unsafe. He was supposedly an expert, at least in deceptive relationships, but I felt like he didn't see me as the patient. He just saw the behavior, the acting out as the patient, my partner as the patient. And meanwhile, I'm barely surviving psychologically because I'm highly traumatized. So there's just completely missing me altogether. And then the other therapist I saw individually, and she focused again on me making a decision. And why wasn't I making a decision to leave, not understanding that I was being paralyzed by cognitive dissonance, which is a real neurological condition. She didn't realize that I didn't know what the truth was. How can you act on something when you don't know the truth? Yeah. And the other thing is she's also asking me to act on something with a partner who's dangerous. How do you do that? I mean, so just completely misses all the nuances of it. And then when I did get into couples therapy with is what you don't do in narcissistic abuse, do not go to therapy with a narcissist, because the very thing that they say is going to happen is what happened to me. He weaponized it. He became the best client, and then he used what was happening in therapy against me, while he then gaslit her and deceived her. And then I saw a fawning relationship occur between him and her, where she started to hang on all his words and butter him up and take it. I mean, it just was a disaster. So again, I was put in a really risky position and not helped at all. So yeah, it's scary, really. And I hear it. I know you do too. I hear it over and over about people like I go and then they get this bad advice and then they feel bad, or they feel like they're the problem, or they feel ashamed, or they shut down, or they quit risking. I mean, it's just not good.
Or if they did more, or if they loved them more, or if they worked on themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or had more sex, or they, were more emotionally available, or they quit nagging, or whatever it is that they say they're accused of.
Yeah. Yeah. And so would you say that your support and your healing came from, or like a big component of your healing was the support group that you joined?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. I would say a huge piece of the healing around trauma came from that group, because this is what that group did. They gave me the control back. Yeah. I got to show up in the way that was most protective and safe for me. There's a good book written by Bruce Perry called The Boy Raised as a Dog. And now it's about children, and he's probably the premier psychiatrist in the United States working with traumatized children. But one of the points that he makes in that book is traumatized people need to regain control. They've lost all control over their life. They don't even have control over their safety. And the best thing a therapist can do is you time your interventions based on that person's readiness. That's what that group did for me. It let me come. I could decide to listen. I could decide what I wanted to say. I could decide how much I felt safe sharing. It gave me the control back so that I could begin to be around people, which is where the trauma was, and do it safely while I was healing and having a new experience. And the second thing was meeting other victims like myself and discovering I'm not alone, that my experiences were common, that there's acceptance and understanding. It was so powerful to have someone get it and to say, yeah, me too. I'm so sorry. Or isn't that the worst? And you're like, yeah, it's the worst. It was so wonderful to find that kind of camaraderie and support. So for me, that has brought me so much healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And having the support of people that they don't look at you like you're crazy or have, 12 heads.
Exactly. Or ask you why you stayed, or ask I hate this one. What red flags did you miss? Or, with every relationship, it takes two to tango. Have you considered what part you might have played?
Yeah.
At that point, I usually see red, and I usually have to turn around and just shut my mouth to keep from going off on somebody about that.
Do you think that you got courage to take some steps by seeing the other steps that other people in your group took?
I think actually it's back to the people that I've met online. I think the group was they were very all injured women. I mean, I have to say that all of us were limping pretty bad. But the leader, I could tell she'd gone through something similar herself. Now, I don't know if her ex was a narcissist or not, but I know that he was a serial cheater and really gaslit and lied to her a lot. But I could tell that she'd healed. And that was really encouraging to see her life and see her on her feet, to know that I could also get there. But it really helped just to meet other people, just to see other people at various stages. Some were ahead of me, some were where I was at, and some was behind me. And it gave me hope that there's this process and the hope that I could get my life back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's so many people that come to me that feel very alone. They don't feel alone in the space of our coaching arrangement, because they can tell I get it. And we are having these deep sessions. But I think once they leave that, sometimes they're like, okay, she gets it, but nobody else seems to get it. And the people in my life are making me feel crazy. And I know that you are putting together a group. Actually, by the time this podcast is out, the group will be launched. So there will be a group out, or there is a group out at this point, of being able to go to have a place of people that understand, but also a lot of education, which I truly feel is the first step in healing, is understanding what is happening to you.
Yeah. Yeah. The group has launched. It's called Toxic Free Relationship Club. It's a 2-tiered membership. I created this because it's something I believe in so strongly, that I saw the power of healing inside of the experiences I had, that I wanted to take all the best pieces of my experience and then incorporate it into one place. And so there's 2 tiers. The upper tier is called Academy, but let me start to the lower tier. The lower tier is built on the community. So that's where you're going to get support. There's also once a month, I come in and lead office hours, which is sort of like an open forum of a video call. So people can come in and talk about their problems with each other, talk about their problems with me, get a psychologist's opinion about what's going on, and kind of it's not therapy, but it certainly is heavy psychoeducational plus support. And then there's also, they have access to any of the past webinars that I've created, access to my book, and then just access to each other. There's a lot of dialogue that goes on about what people are encountering as they go through the legal system. How do they manage the issues with children and their emotional health, and how do they imagine their emotions and find their healing? That's at the lower level. And at the upper level is all that. So all the support plus heavy, heavy education. So at least twice a week is roughly an hour to hour and a half to 2 hours worth of class material that's being streamed or live or interactive, and then becomes part of a library, so that there's a continuing growth of information about narcissistic abuse, about what's happening, so you can make sense and understand what you experienced. You also can get advice about what to do in these different situations. It just helps you to sort of it's almost like a master class in a way. So that has been launched. And I'm super excited because we have a small group in there right now that's very, very active. And somebody just said to me, if somebody's returning and said, I have found this group more helpful than my own therapy has been. Now, I'm not saying to people, don't do therapy. Yes, do therapy. But it was wonderful to hear to say, hey, this is psychologist is running this, is less than the cost of one coaching call a month. And it's so jam-packed with stuff that it's as useful as therapy. So I'm excited about this, really excited.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a great first step for somebody who is definitely like, they're not quite ready to like take those big leaps, but they definitely need to understand what's going on, and they need that support and that understanding and like the education to put together the pieces. Like I remember feeling so confused and not knowing where to go, and like not knowing who to ask for a resource and not getting that support, but feeling like there's a group, like I can begin to like work through my cognitive dissonance with a group that's also doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like that beginning step of like, we don't know what we don't know. But once other people are putting together those things, like you can always look into someone's story and say, oh my God, this is so similar. Like it might not be exact, but it's so similar, and the same theme and the same lesson is there. And like, it's almost like you get even by just looking, reading someone else's story, getting that feedback and being able to say, okay, I am not alone. And like, I can see myself through this person's eyes too.
Right, right. And that's a critical piece, but it also does a second really important piece that I think that we often don't talk about, but I really want to highlight. One of the things that happens in these relationships is you felt like yourself was not enough. You weren't perfect enough. You didn't do things right enough. You didn't handle things emotionally correct. And that maybe even you're the crazy one. So you started to shrink and maybe even to change to try to fit into whatever this invisible mold, this perfection that you somehow couldn't hit, this idealistic thing that was being put out there. One of the things I see happen in these groups specifically that I'm so excited about is I see people expand. I see them reclaiming themselves, getting their voice back, just having a chance to show up in a new way, to be validated, to have their emotions be heard and then be supported and even maybe understood. All of that just helps them like just kind of fill up their own skin again. It's like before we were shriveling into this little teeny little like thing. And now I see people filling and expanding and becoming their full self again. And that to me is the point of this, is that I want us to be who we should be, who we want to be, who we see ourselves to be, and who we maybe ideally once were. I want us to be able to return to that. And I see that happens. People always say, don't get into a relationship until you heal first. Okay, there is a little bit of truth with that. Yes, you need to like not be highly anxious. You need to sort of process some of the stuff that you went through. But where it really comes back to healing is the damage occurred in the relationship. The damage is going to be healed in relationships. You can't get away from that. And how better to do it with others who are also trying to relearn, heal together and find safety together.
Yeah. And to learn what healthy is together.
Exactly.
Yeah, because we know what it's not, but I think a lot of us get lost on like, well, then what is it? And
right.
Yeah, when you were talking about like the effects of the group, I actually got the chills. Just think like the goosebumps. I was just thinking about like how warm those environments can be, just being in that place of a bunch of people that just truly get it and that are committed to learning together.
Yeah, I love it. And I see this community, it just spills support, spills compassion. And that's what we need. That's what we're looking for. We're hungry for it. We've been criticized and blamed and made to say that we need that kind of support. We need that kind of understanding. It's just, it's beautiful to see it happening inside the group.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us are told and convinced that we were the problem, that we were it was our issue. We're the problem. And that all of this stuff wouldn't be happening if we were in such a problem.
Exactly.
And it's not the truth, but it's so hard, especially I feel like most people that are with a narcissist or with an abuser, like we are so empathetic. We're so caring. We don't want to hurt people. We won't hurt people the way that they hurt us or that are hurting us. And I know that I do this for myself is I look inside when somebody says like, you're doing this to me. I never finger point and go, no, you did it. I go, wait, did I? And I think about it. And especially when you're in that like swell of the relationship, it's impossible to be like, no, it's not me. You know what I mean? You typically are like, okay, I guess it is me. Like I feel crazy anyway. But
And you're touching on one of the things that I find people find as a reason not to do this. They end up saying, well, it's costly. Yeah, it's costly, but it's still less than the cost than one coaching call a month. And here's the other thing. When we don't put that kind of healing, the money into our healing, then we're going to be stuck in this process for a lot longer. I've met people who are where they're at for years, and it's because they accidentally got isolated. They didn't get the kind of support that they need, and then they're struggling to really recover well. So I sort of see this back to the same analogy that you have on an airplane. You put your own oxygen mask on so you can put on the oxygen mask of those that you love. You focus on your healing, so then you have more to give to your kids and to your family and to those around you who are also recovering. But if you leave yourself to last, then everything that everybody's getting around you is from the fumes, not from your plenty. And I know I am one of the worst when it comes to spending money on myself. I just really struggle to do good self-care. But self-care is so important in this healing process. Everything comes off of our wellness. If we're well, then we have more to give. Our well is full, so it spills over onto other people.
Yeah. And it's so worth it. It's so worth it because if it's going to help you feel better and help you get out of what you're in, then it's always so worth it. And I always just tell people, like, of course you can put like a price tag on things that you have to do what's best for you, but it's always like, it's not something you're going to regret. And at the very least, you'll be more in touch with yourself. You might not know where it's all going to go, but to like give something like this a shot, right? How much money have you spent trying to save that relationship through trips and gifts and dinners, and the list can go on, but this is something you can do for you.
Give you an example of what I faced when I was in that group. I said it took me 3 hours a week, and it was like twice the cost of this. So it was more money than this. I was at the same time, my son was battling leukemia. He was hospitalized, a lot of it. So I spent 6+ months, a lot of that at the hospital bedside. There was days that I would sit in the carport of the hospital. I'm feeling emotional saying this. I sit at the carport and then get into that video, log into that call, and sit with those women before I go in and spend the afternoon with them. I had to make time. And then money wasn't easy for me when I first left. I was in a really pretty tight position. But again, I had to make that a priority. I kept saying, this is going to pay off down the road. This is what I am, such a mess. I need to do this. I know this is the right thing to do. But it was a sacrifice. You know my story enough, Jessica, to know that was probably one of the smartest moves I've made.
Yeah. And I hope that when people listen to this episode, they are really encouraged to find community and to find people that understand. I think like your group is amazing, especially with all the education that's involved in it. But if it's not that group, it's just to find community in a way that you can. Can you tell us how they can find the group?
Yeah, how they can find the group is I'll make sure that you have a link. It's a sign-up link that just sends you initial information. My website's under development, so normally I would send you to my website, but it's not quite ready yet. So that's why we're using this landing page. But they can also just reach out to me too. And I will make sure, one of the things I will make sure is that I'll give you a coupon code. So anybody who comes in through this podcast, I'll make sure that they get a 50% discount for the first 3 months. They can try it out and see if they like it. Yeah, then they can try it out and see if they like it. And then I'll make sure that's good for all of the product, both tiers. Yeah, I'm so convinced of this that I've been thinking about that's important for people to, I believe that if you get the experience, you're going to I want to keep this experience.
Yeah. And I haven't said this yet, but I'm in the group too. I pop in a few times a week, like when when they're having issues and they have questions and there's, I try and ask some questions or even give some input when I can. And if it's valuable, but a lot of the time I go in and I read and people are deep in these conversations and I just read because they're helping each other and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So
it really
I will make sure that link is in the show notes so anybody can go and find it. But if they're just curious, how do I find Kerry? Can you go over your social media handles?
Sure. I'm the same everywhere. So it's Kerry McAvoy, PhD, and it's KerryMcavoy, PhD. Kerry McAvoy, PhD. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, primarily. Those are the main 3 platforms that you can find me on.
Awesome. Well, Kerry, thank you so much for joining me and talking to me about the community and the role the community played in your healing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. I feel very passionate. So it was a delight to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, absolutely.